Well, hey, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, but welcome to MidDay Café. I am your host, Michael Gennati, along with my co-host. We have today Mr. Pete Anello, Mr. Mark Litwin, Mr. Patrick Miller, and of course, our guest presenter who will be joining us shortly, Mr. Mark Kashman. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. A couple of just quick housekeeping items. We love to hear from you. You will notice over on the right-hand side of your screen as you're watching, there is a Q&A panel. There you can post your questions during the session. We'll be keeping the questions private, and then we will tee them up orally for Mr. Kashman as well as our other folks. But if you have shout outs, we would love to hear from you, who you are, where you're watching from, what's going on, and we'll recognize you during the webcast. Real quickly on today's MidDay Cafe, and then we'll jump right into the news. First of all, we're going to have news and events, and Patrick Miller is going to be teeing that up in just a moment. Then we will be joined by our special guest, Mr. Mark Kashman, who will be talking to us about Microsoft lists. And I'm super excited about this because there are some very powerful things that you can do with lists, including within Teams, within SharePoint, and so much more. Then we'll have open Q&A where it's your time. We want to hear from you. Open it on up. Then finally, we'll wrap up, and then we will post this all to the blog. I get asked this every time. So following this broadcast, you'll be able to find us at aka.ms/HLS blog. That's again, aka.ms/HLS blog. We'll have the recording from today, any links and resources, and then also links to our audio podcast version because we're now on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more, and you can catch us anytime there as well. But without further ado, I'm going to be kicking this over to my colleague, my manager, Mr. Patrick Miller, who has today the news and events. And Patrick, do you want me to forward or do you want to share your desktop?
I'll go ahead and click next for me, Mike. That'd be great.
All righty. And there we go.
Excellent. So I took the easy week. I have to admit that there was just a ton of news with Ignite being last week. And so to kind of cap that off and give everyone an easy place to look, the first link that I wanted to share with the group on news is the Ignite 2021 Book of News. And so that first link, once you get this afterward, really does help you go see by topic area for your teams, for your coworkers, exactly what all was announced in a bunch of different areas. Aside from the blog posts themselves, this will give you as a leader in your organization, your healthcare organization, a chance to go, hey, what are all the things I want to get my teams busy looking at, paying attention to, that sort of thing. And then pointers there within those to the even deeper looks at the different technologies. So that's the first thing, Mike. The next thing, just pulling a few of them out of there that were really great to me. We announced something called Microsoft Mesh. It's a bit of another piece of our mixed reality story. And in this particular revision, we show this mixed reality platform. Again, we're calling it Mesh. This powered by Azure and allows people in different physical locations to join collaborative shared experiences with holographic experiences from all different kinds of devices. Just a fantastic display of what we're able to achieve from a technology point of view, and then sort of a window into what we're able to do from a virtual health in the future point of view. So as a lot of you are trying to do those training, learning projects within healthcare, that one seemed really highly relevant because of what you can really do to immerse people in something, that kind of thing. Shifting gears on the next one to a totally different technology area, we also announced a product called Power Automate Desktop that'll be now included with Windows 10 to allow you to do low-code robotic process automation within Windows 10 for free. So if you are an insider build person, you can actually turn that on and start to look at it soon in the coming weeks in upcoming builds. So if that's something that you're looking at, many people in healthcare are actually jumping on the Power Platform that we have to automate all sorts of processes, lots of legacy things, and digitize healthcare. So thinking about that aspect and really some of that legacy set of apps that's down at the desktop is where that one comes in. The next one is Microsoft Teams Connect, and this is a set of technologies, or really a set of sharing capabilities within Teams that lets you share channels with anyone, internal, external to your organization. So you don't have to go and share the whole team anymore with Teams Connect. You can actually share a channel. And I think about this, how collaborative healthcare has become now in the modern era, with folks working on studies with a partner, working on drug creation with a partner, working on research with a hospital partner. I mean, it's just, there's so much collaboration in the space that the need to be able to get that feedback back in real time without opening the entire organization up from a security boundary perspective, ability to chat, collaborate on apps, share, co-author documents, all that stuff that we sort of take for granted as Office 365 customers internal to our org, to really be able to open that up is what Microsoft Teams Connect is about. It's in private preview now, will roll out more broadly later in the calendar year. The next one, Mike, was a security-related one, and there's a bunch of announcements, by the way, in every one of these categories. So this is literally me cherry-picking some of the ones that I go, ooh, that's interesting. The next one is a little bit more in our XDR story on the security side, where we're taking the Defender portal and combining more intelligence from Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Office 365, helping the security professionals in your organization to unify alerts across user investigation pages, so that I can open an investigation in one place, see it in another. That sort of capability set was more of what we announced in that front. Next one is security skilling. So all the stuff that we've released, sort of a constant flow of security things, does not come without the need to learn. We all are pretty ready to learn. And so what the next one is about is 4 new sort of skills, exams and certifications around security and compliance. So we actually released one for security compliance and identity fundamentals, Information Protection Administrator Associate, Security Operations Analyst Associate, and Identity and Access Administrator Associate. So all new things to sort of light up the new security skills that your teams are gaining, and to ensure that they're ready to tackle what's going on out there. And then last one on the hyperlink side is I found a great article on Cloud App Security that was released in the last week, not necessarily Ignite related, but really how do I secure those SaaS apps, third-party SaaS apps, and make them part of that identity, that single identity story, and really understand how to do all that. So there's a whole great article that I'm sharing there around that. So please take advantage of taking a look at that. And then last, but certainly not least, next week, Teams Governance and Adoption with Caruana. Fantastic. Caruana has been a frequent visitor to our various series here, and always popular. So please tune in, not to be missed, and certainly not to take any away from Mr. Mark Kashman, but we've enjoyed Caruana joining us multiple times over the years in various forms. So looking forward to that one as well. Turn it back to you, Mike.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Patrick. So moving along, we're going to move into then our midday feature. And today, I got a little aggressive there. Today, like I mentioned, we have Mr. Mark Kashman. For those of you who are out there and know SharePoint Online, Office 365, he is one of the top presenters for Microsoft at all of our big events, and he's just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And so with that, I am going to turn it on over to you, Mark, and let's put your face in there, and you can go ahead and kick my slides out and take it away.
All right. It's always my pleasure to kick Mike Gennady out, because if it means that I can take over Mike Gennady's presentation, it means I've made it. It means I've gotten somewhere. But Mike and Patrick and everybody, thanks for inviting me, and obviously for all that are attending to learn more about Microsoft lists. We've got a nice whirlwind of getting really clear what are Microsoft lists, see some nice demos. We've got a special template for the healthcare industry that I think will just give an indication of what lists can do. They're highly configurable and can be malleable to whatever it is you need. But I wanted to give a one last shout out to Mike, who used to do a show called Mike on the Go, and now this is Mike on a Mug. I know it's a little hard to see, but Mike had a little fun with some advertising, as he always does, putting my face on a mug. So I thought it would be great to put Mike's face on a mug. So cheers,
Turn
Mike.
about. Fair play.
And I have to admit, I liked your almost flip on your own last name with calling yourself Gelati or Janati.
That's right.
So maybe I'll go get some nice gelato ice cream afterwards. But anyway, thank you for having me, and let's get started. So Microsoft Lists is a Microsoft 365 app, and if you've been around on this journey in on-premises to the cloud and Office 365, now Microsoft 365, this really is truly an evolution of SharePoint lists. But we now put a name, give you some new capabilities, give you a couple new entry points, and within the next 30 minutes, I hope to highlight all of it. And as a pre-read or as an afterthought, I put a link to our latest announcements and to our main resource center in the chat. So if you want to hit those and learn more beyond what I shared today, there's certainly a lot of materials out there. So let me get started. I'm just going to jump in. I've got a slide presentation, a couple of slides, mostly demos, and time for Q&A at the end. But I'm Mark Kashman, as Mike said. I have focused on SharePoint for quite some time. So this evolution feels natural to me to now be the product manager for Microsoft Lists. But I am in the Microsoft 365 marketing organization representing what our engineering colleagues are doing. And they're doing a lot across SharePoint, OneDrive, now Lists, the connections to Planner, and of course, Microsoft Teams. And that's where I wanted to start to kind of put everything a little bit into context with this broader portfolio that we have as a subset of some of these applications for how you can work collaboratively across multiple content types. And I'll be real clear, obviously, on what those content types are, but it's pretty much four. One of the ones that we sit alongside is tasks. So we've got Microsoft To Do, we've got Microsoft Planner, and now a culmination of those appear in Microsoft Teams as tasks in Teams. Ultimately, though, it's a way to track individual tasks that you assign yourself. You might jot down what you need to do for today, and once you do them, they are sort of out of view, not necessarily deleted, but really beyond your view. Same with team tasks. You may have a plan that is in your planner aligned to a specific project or team, and you then might assign tasks or get tasks assigned to you in the context of that team or that project. But really, this universe of tasks is there's something to do, and at some point you will have done it, and then you move on. It's pretty limited life cycle, obviously with a lot of power in how you can track and manage your projects. Alongside that is what we're talking about today, Microsoft Lists. It takes that notion of I have a lot of data, and it might be a lot of different types of data across a lot of different projects, a lot of different teams, and a lot of different types of information. Some of it might be physical assets that you're tracking, like a set of devices that you have and are managed across your work environment. And that could be up into the thousands, if not multiple thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of items that you're tracking. And you're tracking the details, or what we call the columns or the metadata. And that could be something that can be highly configurable. So imagine if you're tracking issues on a site, or if you're tracking leads at a sales conference, or if you're tracking, like I mentioned, physical assets. There's lots of ways to get started, but there's also ways to configure what information you're tracking and to have that be collaborative and extendable and something that you might even tie to a business process. Always alongside that is really the ultimate content type that we often adhere to when we talk about SharePoint or Microsoft 365, and that is documents. Documents obviously can be anything in the range of Office documents, PDFs, CAD files, large wave or video files like MP4s or whatever it might be. Where that ultimately is stored, if it's collaborative by nature, that's really what we're talking about in this slice. And that is based on SharePoint Files platform that we then have multiple instances of different unique experiences. Some of it is automatically permissioned, like OneDrive is permissioned for you until you share something, or a broader space like Microsoft Teams where you put your files is obviously shared with the team automatically. Ultimately, the goal here is to help you manage and track your files, work on them collaboratively, and then share them or move them along wherever they need in that life cycle, especially when you really adhere to policies, classification, or anything from an e-discovery. Highly advanced file system, ease of use and access from a teamwork and a draft mode, getting things started working with others. The last piece of the puzzle has been kind of staring at you the whole time, right in the middle. Microsoft Teams is the glue that binds. It's a lot of where I'll give this presentation from, just as one example of working with Mike on the content and refining for what we'll present today and talk about. But ultimately, it's also where conversation happens. But it's not limited to Teams, of course. Most of everything that I mentioned across tasks, lists, information, and files can always be shared in multiple ways, whether that's using Outlook, linking to information as you share it, or even in a Yammer community, all of which have their own element within Microsoft Teams, which is really where I'll direct you to start if you haven't already with Microsoft List, to try it today. It's something that everybody can do, whether you're in Teams or if you're coming at it from the Lists app itself in Microsoft 365. But ultimately, we hope to find that you find that it's simple. So if you've been on this journey, it's even more simple than it's ever been to get started. It's easier to configure and change things if you want to add colors or smart formatting. There's a lot of things that you can now do with more clicks versus code without even going further deeper into what used to be list settings. Now it's a little bit more upfront for those common things that people are doing. But I'll show you this, and I think it'll come alive to see how easy they are these days. Ultimately, the goal is to give you the smart tools so that you can track and manage information. And it's usually not one list. We often have 5 or 10 lists that we often manage and care about. And then there's on the fringe 15, 20, if not even more, that we get invited to contribute to. So we want collaboration to be easy. We want the setup of the list to be easy. And we want it to be flexible so that it looks and feels like how you want your information to be presented to other people. And the glance ahead on the right is what lists look like in Teams. And the biggest change with Microsoft Lists is you can now create a list in Microsoft Teams and a couple of other entry points. The first being where I'll start my demo is what we call the Microsoft Lists app in Microsoft 365. But also, if you kind of cheat ahead on the right, is the new Microsoft Lists app for iOS. And I'll have a little bit of a video run through on that so you can see what that looks like.
And Mark, since you're mentioning, we did have one question, just to interrupt, yikes, around iOS lists. And somebody asked if you knew of any timeline around iOS support for the Intune protection policy for lists.
Yeah, when we conclude, I'll put a link in that came from the engineering team. So we've put it on the roadmap.
Nice.
So we mentioned that we will be having Intune support. Some of the configuration for the policy is available today, but the picker or some of what you can do to have it as an official device offering through Intune is what they're working on. So there's a nice article that's really a help article today in the tech community that I'll post. And the timing of it should be by May or June, if not before, from what I understand. But I'll also put in the link to the roadmap ID that's specific to Intune support for the Lists app for iOS. And of course, when we release the Android app into the later part of this year, that will apply as well. There may be some delta to delivery of the app to then when it's available in Intune, but similar pattern as I think we just launched the iOS app last month. And a few months later is getting that official Intune support.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So obviously ask any questions that you have during. If Mike or anybody sees one that bubbles up to what we're talking about or just is something that shouldn't wait, we'll address them. We'll have time at the end as well. But one of the things I like to do is sort of rip the Band-Aid off the FAQs. And I won't spend a lot of time here because I hope is by the time I get to the last few, you will have already read ahead. This slide is really intended to take some of the feedback that we've been getting or some of the common questions and just tackle them off the bat. I mentioned this in my intro. Microsoft Lists is an evolution of the SharePoint Lists infrastructure. And the key element here is you don't have to migrate existing lists. Existing lists will show up. They adhere to all the same SLA, enterprise security and compliance measures. you would expect or know or already trust from SharePoint, because ultimately any list you create, it's stored in SharePoint. So we do use that same infrastructure, the benefits being whatever you've invested in the past carries forward, and of course they will also get the new capabilities, of which I will show you. One point of clarity we often get compared to what I already mentioned around tasks is how does list compare to to-do and planner? And I think the main thing around here is that lists are customizable, so you can customize the form, you can track as much information per item as you want, you can configure the view, you can use a variety of out-of-the-box views and custom views, and you can tie it to business process. So if you're familiar with Power Automate, that's the extreme measure where if you have complex workflows, we also have a rules engine that helps you with some simple notification and alerts. So it's highly configurable. It is not intended just for tasks. And I hope by some of the examples that I show you today, it's a lot of different types of information that go beyond what you would track as a task. There is a new element to Microsoft Lists for personal items and personal lists, and it's stored the same as your OneDrive from a files perspective. It is your own personal storage in Microsoft 365. It's governable by your IT department. It's accessible by you and only you until you share it from a who can see my list perspective. And it complies with, of course, everything within Microsoft 365 boundaries. The availability, just to be really clear, we are now at worldwide 100% availability. That's through Microsoft 365 and the new app in Microsoft Teams, plus the Lists for iOS app. It's available to all commercial customers, so that's education, enterprise, and government. And yes, I mean all forms of government. So if you've got any tenant in Microsoft 365 or you've purchased just at the Office 365 level and you've licensed SharePoint, then you or all your users who represent that would be available to use and, of course, have hopefully seen already the Microsoft Lists app in the Microsoft 365 app launcher. So last two, we do have a rules engine that is not based on Power Automate. Common question. It's not really a perception of anything, but it is essentially a rules engine that is tied and lives within the list schema. So if you build a rule, it lives within inside the list, and it's triggered based on the activities of the list. And I'll show you an example. And the same is we have a new comments capability. You have always the ability to have a comment or a chat stream within Microsoft Teams. But if you're working on a list outside of Teams, same as you can add a comment to a document, you can add a comment to a list item. And coming soon will be the ability to @mention, but the comments themselves live inside the list. So think of it as just a separate column of that list. And the other point that some people ask, can that be searchable, since comments are oftentimes a little bit more valuable and a little bit more personal. So those comments do not flow into the search index. They're just a part of the list. You'll see them on the list. You can manage them just like any other content or column of a list. So with that, I'll give you just a glance ahead and just some of what I'll be demoing here. And again, Mike, if you see anything based on what I'm showing, either here or in demos, just let me know. But we're going to take a look at the Lists app in Microsoft 365. Some of this I will skip over, but just as proof points that if you have data in Excel, you import that as a list. You can bring in and start leveraging new and existing lists in Teams. And then there's the refinements. If you've used lists before, you can create views, you can use custom column formatting, row formatting. There's a lot that you can do to make the information exactly how you want it to. And even more so, we make it easy with these ready-made templates. So I think that's enough of slides. I'll pause here just as I switch over a little bit and just ask Mike if there was anything that came through, but if not, I will jump in.
Yeah, so we had a question around, can you control permissions to an individual column, such as the approved status, etc.? This would allow us to protect certain status or columns from the general population while making it visible to a larger audience.
Right now, we don't have the level of it being a permissions-based or authentication, to adhere to any auth. But you, of course, have permissions to the list. You have the ability to configure a view on the list that could be your primary way of sharing out that list. It could be as a part of a SharePoint page or on a SharePoint site. So there's ways to limit the view of information, not the technical permission or access to it, except for the limit of who you're making the list available to. But if you create a view that's sort of your public view, you could minimize what column to show. You could put it into a format, maybe even a calendar view, and put that onto a SharePoint page. And they really don't have a lot of capability to switch the views, but I wouldn't want to present that as a security offering. That is just a way to minimize the view. The other way is if you wanted to build out a Power App on top of your list, you can customize the form using a Power App and add some smarts to the Power App. So wherever that entry point is to the Power App, whether it's a mobile app or embedded on a page or as a tab in Teams, the way that you design the Power App, at that point, it's just treating the list as a backend, without a lot of entry point to the list itself. That being said, it's not 100% secure in that fashion. Again, not wanting to overload, but there's ways to obfuscate, and there's certain ways to permission the base level list itself, and anything in between. If it were something that would give you that solution you're looking for, that's at least what I would propose today.
Cool. And just so you know, the person who asked the question thanked you. Said thanks for asking. Thanks, Mark, for the response. We'll continue to use notifications as a soft gatekeeper for now, as well as special views, and they'll keep an eye on it. So
sounds good. Good. Well, thank you. So the first thing that you're seeing here, I'm going to put it into a full screen mode just through Microsoft Edge with the magic of F11. So take no surprises. This is just a web app now in full screen. And just to orient you, how we got here was in the app launcher, obviously with however you or your colleagues are licensed. You'll see a whole bunch of different apps, and now Lists, if you can see it here on the left, is now a new app for Microsoft 365, or even if you only are invested in the Office 365 level, you'll still see it. If you don't see it, it just means you haven't visited the Lists app yet. So you can always go into all apps or search for Lists in the app launcher. Once you get there, it'll start to appear as a common app that you use. But it's okay if you don't see it here. It just means you haven't visited the page yet, or maybe haven't used Lists yet, and hope to change that today. This is basically your home page for all of your lists. And it has some lightweight intelligence built into it because it knows what are my recent lists. Obviously, it knows that Mark here is logged in. So if I pivot into my list that I mentioned, my personal list that I can then share with other people, I can pivot on that as well, and it'll just minimize my view into those personal lists. But if I go to recent list, it'll be the aggregate of my Teams lists and my recent lists at the personal level. If I choose to favorite anything, and if you can see, if I hover over like this one, you'll see this star here. I can click that, and really quickly it shows up as a new list in my favorite section. Again, just an easy way to get to your lists. I'm going to show you a couple of my individual lists just to kind of walk you through some examples. But one that I do really on the personal level, and it's one of my personal lists, and this is leveraging our event itinerary template. This is just a helpful list for me to track the different engagements that I'm working in. And here we have the one that we're here today. This is Microsoft Lists overview for the MidDay Café. And I just entered it as an item, gave it a date, worked with Mike and team for an abstract and a title and those kinds of things. But it's just a single place for me to go and just to see, what am I presenting and I have coming up. And I can see the different session type. It's a breakout, it's a keynote, it's a workshop. And this is just a helpful way for me as an individual list to track sessions that I said yes to. Coming back, I have an easy way to get back to my list. This is back to the list's home. A fun one that I think kind of exposes a little bit more if it was before Ignite, but since we're after Ignite, this is the list that I maintain with all my engineering colleagues. And I work with the SharePoint admin team, the SharePoint migration team, and of course the Microsoft Lists team. And in this capability, I can go in and I can filter on just list items. So in the upper right, I'm using a filter to show me just items that have been identified as a list feature. And you can see that I track who I'm working with. So if I hover over John, I get that experience of a people card so we can learn more about John. I obviously know him pretty well. But I want to refine this even further and go into when was this disclosed. So I'll do an additional filter just to show you the Ignite announcements, Ignite 2021, and I'll further refine and apply that. And now you can see I've got a smaller set of list items, literally in a list, that I'm working with a variety of program managers. And we've finalized now, because Ignite was just last week, we finalized title, description, any notes. And the good news is it is all now on the public roadmap. And I'll give you some pointers to that if you're interested. But all of these were things that initially the engineering team said, hey, Mark, we're working on a new item and we think it'll land at this particular time. You can see the targeted release date. And if that date is within the range that we're ready to announce it, then we would tag it as Ignite 2021. And obviously this is in the past, but we had some work to do. Then we blogged about it, and then that's where we are today. So this is a real list that I use that helps me track all of the list features, and of course the admin and the migration team features as we prep and get ready to disclose at various points in time in the year. The last one is kind of a visual one. This is just a kind of a fake list that I created for when I did a presentation with the SharePoint Fest team. That's a third-party event team. And I'm sure Mike Gennady has presented at a SharePoint Fest in the past. Just guessing.
Keynoted.
Hey, excellent. Which city? Which
Way
was
back,
your last city?
When they were in Philadelphia.
Oh, nice. Well, they're now doing
ShareFest. Yeah.
Yeah, ShareFest. That's nice. They do now 3: Chicago, DC, and Dallas. Yep. But in the pandemic time, obviously they limited to in-person, so limited to just virtual only. And so they created and reached out to the community, myself included, to do virtual events. So this was just a recreation if I was the event team. And this is just me managing items on a list, but they happen to be the different virtual workshops. These are the real workshops, real trainers. And obviously I've been showing you from a rows and columns perspective, but I want to show you a couple other views that you get or can create. So this is a list. It has an image column, which you see here with the profile. And I'm going to switch over to what we call the gallery view. And it's pretty self-explanatory when you click into it. And you can see here all the images kind of take front and center. And I've just minimized it down so I don't see all the details. But it keeps the formatting that I programmed. If this was already delivered or is now in the past, make it green. If it's an upcoming session, and here's your speaker for the next session with Caruana, she's pretty busy. She's doing a session March 16th around drive-in adoption. Anyway, you can see the ones that are coming up and who they are. The one thing that's kind of fun about the gallery view is you can actually further refine and format it using the card designer. And when I pop this up, usually it's fairly self-explanatory. I'm going to affect what these cards look like. So I can choose to not show the image, which means more information is now visible on my screen, but I'll bring that back. You can see it's pretty responsive and quick. I chose to have title, presenter, and date in that order. I can move those around. So if I want the date to be above title, the presenter, you can see it switches in real time. And if I wanted to learn what session type this was, if it was mixed set of session types, I could add that as well. And these are all workshops. So of course I labeled them all as workshops. So in my mind, I did not need that view. So I chose what you're seeing here. The last thing is you can always show the title of the column so that you get a little bit more information. If you're not as familiar with this data, you can always present it in, this is the title, this is the date, this is the presenter. So I'll leave that, I'll save it. And now we have a gallery view that I further refined and made available. I've already configured a calendar view, but I'm just going to step through on how to create it. So if I wanted to represent these, they all have a date on when they're going to be delivered. So I have a date column. I'm going to go in and I would give it a name like this, calendar. It's already taken, so I won't create it, but I'll show you what it looks like. I would click calendar to say that I want to make it a calendar view. And then I would choose what date I want it to pull off of. And that date would be either that date column or something like created or modified by. So once I click create, what it does, and now it's a choice in my view, is I now get a calendar view of upcoming events, or if I went back in time, I could see which ones were delivered in February, January, and again, I'm just clicking through and you can see very responsive. And once I land on one, if I want to learn more, always I can dig into the form. So I'm going to leave this visual and get back into Teams just to show you what is it like to then create a list in Teams.
Real quick.
And then I've got, yeah.
Yeah, before you do, just real quick, because we did have a couple of questions that I thought followed along real well with what you were showing. By the way, I love seeing all that because that is really, you talk about powerful, quick application by end users. It's awesome. But we did have some questions. So number one was a follow-up on the security one. They just asked if that was something that was being considered for the future.
Yep. The things that I know the team is reviewing. I don't have any real concrete information to share, but usually the pivots of where people really want to control is a pivot at the list item level. And there are things that you can do that break inheritance and kind of get you into tricky zones, but some solutions require it. But it's not an official list item easy to do. But there is the request for list item level control, column level control, or who can see which column and have that be tied to a security group. The other thing that people ask for that the team is aware of is the views that I just showed you, being able to bind, like, let's say this upcoming features view on this particular list. If you wanted to bind that view that you created to a security group or a Microsoft 365 group. I don't have any timing or much more to share, except to let you know that it is a tricky space. Obviously, when you start to put ACLs and sharing controls or apply groups, it has its trickiness, not just from how we build it, but from also the management of it. So I don't know which will come first or how, but the feedback that I know the team is aware of and does have backlog to review and consider.
Great. The next question was, can I share my list with a business partner outside our tenant?
Yeah. So the same as you would be able to create a space and invite a guest that in the past may have been just a SharePoint team site. It can be a SharePoint communication site, a hub site, whatever. So you can create always a list within inside SharePoint. And if you want to just share that site, that's great. If like I am in here, I have another area where I have, and one example I was going to show, and I'll just kind of jump to it, is I have a podcast that I manage, and I work with a co-host and a couple people internally, but I also work with 3 people who are external. And so I've invited them to this particular team, which you can't see here, but it's called the Interzone. And of these 8 people, 3 are external, and I invited them just like any other guest that I would invite into Teams. I invited them as a guest, and now because I've put it here in this space, when I created what we call our Interzone tracker, this Interzone tracker ultimately lives in the connected SharePoint team site, but we created it through Teams, and now most of us work with this list because I've added it as a tab in Teams, which I will show you. But here you can see this is our podcast episode tracker as a tab in Teams, and it happens to be a team with guests. So there's a lot of ways you can invite guests into Microsoft 365. If you do it through SharePoint or Teams, lists live in that space, and if they are a member of your team as a guest, they would have access to the list.
Excellent. And we had one more question, then a quick comment somebody added that I think you'll like. But the question was, can you take a list in SharePoint Online, not a modern list, and easily convert to a list?
So if you have classic lists and you've not chosen to update to just modern lists, pre-Microsoft lists, I would have that conversation first, that just consider, is there something about the classic list, which we know there are outlier scenarios or custom builds that make it so you can't move Microsoft to modern lists, just the notion of a more modern list, which is a setting in your list settings. If you can do that, then you're set, and that's just available. If not, at the end of the day, every list, no matter what it is, classic, modern, or now within Microsoft lists, has a URL, and you can always use it if you want to bring it as a tab in Teams. There's a lot of ways where you can use the Lists app. There's a lot of ways also that you can use the website tab as an app to bring in anything, whether it's a SharePoint site, a SharePoint list, a SharePoint page, you name it. If it's got a URL and permissions are not different to who has access to the team and would be clicking on your tab, then you can use that, and it would bring through a little bit more as an iframe, different than if you use the lists, a more modern list. But if it's a SharePoint list existing and it's already kind of in the modern space, you can import it as a tab already, and I'll show you that when I go through this as a demo. I'll just kind of start into now. You're prompted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, so the process, if they do have that classic, if they bring it, update it to modern, then they can do what you're about to do.
Correct. And if you don't, for whatever reason, you can always bring it in as an asset, as a tab, by just using the website tab app in Teams. Yep. And if there's any questions about that, just follow up offline. A whole host of course, once you click plus, you can do a million things. I'm kind of centering down to just talk about the new Lists app in Teams. There are a number of different ways to bring SharePoint assets. There's ways to embed lists on a SharePoint page. And of course, there's ways to bring in just any type of URL that has the same permissions using the website app. But what I did here is I just clicked on the Lists app in Teams, and it gives me two prompts once I've added it. And if you notice up here, it just says list 2, because I've done this now twice. That name will change, and of course, I can always rename it. So I will show you creating a list, but I just wanted to identify that you can also add existing lists. Initially, it'll just be a list of lists on this or connected site, but you'll be able to also pull in just off of a URL. So what I want to show you is I haven't really showed you the create a list experience, and this is something I wanted to save just for time to show you how it looks like to create a new list inside of Teams. And just to quickly walk you through here, you can always create a blank list. It's the best template in the world because you can do whatever you want with it. You can import data from Excel, or you can use the smarts of another list, like if that episode tracker that I showed you, if you liked the column layout, the color formatting, and some of the smarts behind when I update something that maybe triggers a rule or notification. When you use that, it doesn't bring the data over, but it will apply and give you all of those things kind of as a baseline for your new list. It's pretty cool, and you can do it and pick across different sites and different lists that you have access to. But the one I want to show you is real specific to healthcare, and it's a new template that we have. It's called the Patients template, and it gives you a little bit of a peek ahead. Obviously doesn't populate the information for you, but it will have some pre-populated choices of which you can configure. As you can see here, some of those other choice fields that are available, but it will give me this structure, and it will give me that kind of baseline formatting, and I get to read ahead. What does this list template offer me? Two of the other ones that I think are fairly similar, if you go in and you look at the issues tracker, think about being on site and just tracking issues for whatever project team or whatever office or branch or healthcare level project you might be working on. If you're tracking issues, this is designed to help you identify what is the issue, what's the priority, what's the status, who has it been assigned to, and have a flow tied to that might trigger this person once identified getting notified, and to be able to even tie it to a separate system that you can link off to if you're tracking tickets or open support issues. Whatever that might be, these are not often, these are often solutions for the entire organization, but they're also meant to be just really close to the team solutions. So you can spin these up, and maybe they will only be used for a specific project or a specific period of time. But they're also, giving you that ability to just spin something up very quickly. The last just kind of teaser example is like what I showed you around tracking the SharePoint Fest workshops. But imagine if these are physical assets, trucks that are in a trucking fleet, or devices that are handed to individuals as they roam the halls and meet with patients or go to different wings or branches of the hospital. You are tracking physical assets that maybe have an asset tag. They're either out with somebody, they're in to be repaired, they're manufactured by different people, and different ways that you would track that physical asset. Having that tied to a business process probably is really important, especially when things are needing repair. That might trigger a ticket to be created, in a system that then is actually going to take the physical device and send it off to be repaired. But again, to show you the patient's example, I'm going to go in and use this template and give it a name. And we're going to, I think if you saw Mike in the camera, I think Mike is a patient today. So we'll say Mike is our patient. Sorry, Mike. And then we'll say
I could use some R&R in a bed.
So you can name it anything. You can give it a description. And because Mike gave his blood, sweat, and tears for HLS, we'll make it red just for fun. And he's always full of bright ideas. So you can choose the color, choose the icon, and click create. What is happening is the most important thing, I think, to some of the questions that come up. We get a new name up here for the tab that I can rename. And you can, just shorten it up just so that it's a little bit cleaner. And if you want, you can use emojis and you can type in, healthcare professional, make it for Mike today. So, you can do whatever you normally can do in Teams, but now we have a blank list that's ready for me to add a new item. And again, I'm doing this all in Teams. I'm not going to SharePoint. I didn't have to, go somewhere else. So Mike, I'm going to put in your legal name as Mike Gennady.
Yep.
If there's anything else you want me to add, go for it. I kind of probably know you're Premera Blue Cross. Yes. And this will make sense to some other folks. I'm just going to type in some fake data. Date of birth, we're going to say he's going to be born. Give me a year, Mike.
1962.
1962. Excellent.
November 2nd.
So obviously this is highly configurable. I can change what these choices are. I can add columns and data that I want. Why do I think Pennsylvania? But maybe
I'm actually North Carolina now.
Oh, okay. And what's the diagnosis? Let's make it easy on Mike. Bronchitis, and we'll admit him on Friday since we just got this. So anyway, there's a lot of information I put in my friend, who I often put for demos. It obviously would go for Active Directory on being able to pull in a person, and if you needed to add attachments. So at the end of the day, I've just added a new item, and you can see if I click into it, the form that we get is pretty out of the box. There's a lot that you can do to configure the form. But the last thing that I'm going to demo, and it really kind of ends and then just move to slides and Q&A, is now that I have a list item, the real value of having a list in Microsoft Teams is to be able to start a conversation about this. And so if I wanted to, and I'll see if I can pull up Michael here. Let's see, are you Mike or Michael in the gal? I think it's because I'm in a space where I can't invite you. Yeah, I'm just in a space where you're not a team member. So I'll just post to my friend Chris McNulty. And we'll just say, do you want a demo? But basically, what happens is I can mention somebody, add some context, post it down. And what happens from at this point, Chris's side of things, is if you go to the posts of that team, the chat, I can see now here that Chris would have gotten a notification in his Teams in the activity. And then here I can see there's a new list item or a something that Mark wants me to look at. And when I click on it, it's going to take me to that list item with the context of the conversation side by side. And now if I have any questions about Mike, did you see that he was feeling better today? Or it looks like his head is healing better after his spike or whatever happened to his head. But anyway, it's that value of having that conversation side by side. And of course, it's alongside all the things that you can have as tab, as tasks, the other ones that I wanted to show you. Back to the one that I already showed you, which was our roadmap list. This is that roadmap list as a tab in Teams. This one I had already existed before Microsoft List shipped. So I just went in and added this as an existing list. But as you can see, the value of how I work with it carries over. I can group by, I can go to a specific item, I can read about it, I can do everything that you expect to do with lists. And in this case, I've customized the form. That's the last thing I wanted to show you. And as you can see here, it adds this icon and a roadmap item with the pipe, and then it pulls from the title. So on this particular item, I can see it a little bit bigger up here. I can also see that once things are published, I direct my engineering peers to go to the public roadmap if they have questions about what does it say, what is it titled, all of that stuff. So I added this link to be able to then go, plus the formatting here, so it takes up the full breadth of the form itself. But essentially, that is what I wanted to cover from a demo perspective. I'll just move to kind of a resource. I actually think I've got one more slide that wanted just to walk you through what does this all look like on a mobile device. And then, Mike, if there are questions, and then certainly to move through any feedback or Q&A. This is just cycling through the new experience on the Lists app for iOS. I forgot to update this slide. It is currently available. I'll put the link in the chat, but you can go there. Just go to aka.ms/mslists/app/iOS. But again, I'll put that in there. But this is just showing you what does it look like to access this list, to work on a list item, to create a new list from a template. Everything I just showed you in the context of working with lists, creating them, sharing them, editing, is all available through the Lists app. And if I was using the Microsoft Teams app, they've also updated it that when you add it as a tab in Teams, like some of these up here, you can always get to any tab through the Microsoft Teams mobile app. And they've updated the ability to this nice rich experience of working with your list if you've added it as a tab in Teams, now even through the Teams mobile app. So no matter where you're entering your list from, what it is you're wanting to accomplish, or what it is you need to do, you can do even when you're on the go. And with that, that is essentially the end of time, end of our time, not the end of time. And if there are any questions, certainly willing to stay for as long as you are to answer them. And also, once we start to wrap up, add a couple of the links that I had mentioned so that you can read more.
So we had a comment, and this was on a previous list, and I just had to read it out. It said, "Mark, I like your Minnesota Vikings list. My favorite NFL."
I can show you that because that's super fun. Let's see, where was it? Now that I got to get to it. Vikings. If you see it, yell at me.
On our end, it's hard to see.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, no, sorry. So here's the Minnesota Vikings list that I created for when I worked with that user group. And of course, I don't know football that well, but I pretended that I did, and obviously walked through lots of different formatting. Their weight I made, where you could actually see their weight, and I kind of oriented around their heaviest person, which, if you know the Vikings, is Garrett Bradbury, at least the time of this. And always fun to see it in the gallery view, and just grabbed images from the internet, slapped them into the list, and configured it a little bit differently than what I had showed you before. Super easy to do, and it reminds me that I forgot to show you the rules. So we now have rules. So if I want to go in and create a rule, little different than working with Power Automate, this does not require Power Automate. But if I wanted to go in and do something based on when a column changes, when, and we'll say if they're, what was the status? When they're, let's say when their weight changes, and it's is, and we'll enter a value, happens to be, we'll enter a value. If it goes above 300, send an email to me because I want to know somebody who's been eating too much or something like that. Maybe a bad example, but easy way to basically trigger off of some value on the list that changes, and to have it be emailed either to me or to be able to be emailed to the person who last modified, or at any time if I just wanted to type in somebody's name in here, I could have an email sent to my friend Bill Bear. And this list would then, anytime that weight hit 300 or more, would then send an email to Bill. And here I can manage those. So sorry, I'd forgotten to show rules before, but if you look for the Automate menu, and you can create a rule, and that's coming soon to be able to do that in Teams as well.
So this brings up the next question that we got, and I think it's a great segue into it, because what you're really showing again is for those folks who, Power Automate is really meant for lines of business and to push out that kind of low code building solution, but it's still pretty intimidating for a lot of people.
Yep.
Whereas if you can just do some basic point and clicking here, you can tee that up, and that's what I love. And that brings us to our question from Eric. And Eric asked, For end users that have limited experience with Power Automate, how do you recommend getting them started with automating actions with Microsoft Lists?
So the easiest thing is what I just showed you. It technically doesn't leverage Power Automate, so I'll caveat that with you're not learning Power Automate, you're not building that skill. But if your needs really are focused around alerts and notifications based on how your information changes, and again, to go back to something that's roadmap oriented, if any of these assets, and I'll just click into an older one as an example, I could have a rule, and the particular rule that I've built out for this list is anytime any of my colleagues, mostly engineers, go in, sorry, on this one, and they change the status to this item needs roadmap ID. I hope you can see that. It's a choice field that I put in, and I typed in needs roadmap ID. And then I had a meeting with my colleagues. Anytime you have something that's ready to disclose, just mark it needs roadmap ID. And what happens is it will trigger a rule that just sends me an email that gives me the list link to this item and the awareness that I know the rule behind that means we're ready to disclose. So gives me the action item to refine the title, make sure we have it described properly, and to get the right target release date. But it's just that. It's just an alert that's triggered off of the list data. Could be based on date, could be based on any of these things that get triggered, especially important on the notification that I could send a notification based on whoever's listed in this field. It doesn't have to be listed as always John. If John changes or moves roles and somebody else gets listed here, the notification would come with that awareness. The second part of the answer, Mike, is if you need to learn Power Automate, and I'll show you this more in the context of from where you can trigger a list from to go into Power Automate. My honest answer is I am not a Power Automate expert, and if I have something that requires something to go in and actually trigger a real, gosh, what am I trying to say? A real flow, or to design a real flow, the easiest way to get started is if you go into Power Apps, or Power Automate, and to create a flow, the first thing you see that pops up here is the template gallery. And you can go in and show more, you can go into the gallery and search. And a lot of these are decently titled to give you a quick start to be able to build out a flow. Sometimes it's just changing a couple of permissions properties or whatever that you need that's going to be specific to your thing, but it builds out pretty much what you're wanting to do. So if you wanted to go to request manager approval, and this might take a second just to get into the Automate Designer, but almost without knowing anything about Power Automate, and I qualify for that. I'm not a Power Automate expert. Once I get validated and I get into the system, you'll see that it builds out the flow for me, which is pretty much already usable. I just have to maybe give it a name and tweak a thing or two. But basically you see it and it goes in and you can tweak the original template and then set the parameters as you would want. So again, once you get into the Power Automate flow, it already knows where your list is. You don't have to populate that. It already knows based on the template what you're trying to accomplish. And by going in and tweaking, like what is the email going to say when you send a notification? What data will I pull from the list and populate to give that context? Whatever that is, you can see I didn't build this flow. I just used a template. And the more you just kind of poke around and give it a try and maybe do a little light reading, you can learn a lot about Power Automate pretty quickly. Just have the willingness to click a template and kind of dive into it. Starting from scratch is a different skill set. I think once you learn it, you'll be able to do it. But I think the level of just managing your list, working with rules, using templates in Flow, Power Automate, and then going from there and maybe even needing, if at some point, hiring out somebody who has that skill to just refine a workflow that's super important and maybe really critical to have done right.
Awesome. And I think that was the last of our questions.
All right. Well,
so
I'll put in some links in the show notes. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the questions and interest in Microsoft Lists. And Mike, thank you for having me.
No, we thank you. And just real quick, we're going to go ahead and push on over our send live and my content There we go. Now we're showing. So thank you very much, Mark. That was great. And, I know I hadn't, before we talked, I had not even looked at the patients list. And I think there's a lot of power in those templates that are there and available for people, both to use from scratch as well as to amplify them. But we want to thank everybody who joined us for the great questions. We will have, just as a reminder and wrap up, if you go to aka.ms/HLS blog, that's aka.ms/HLS blog, and please share the link with your colleagues that are out there. We will have the recording from today's session will be available on demand. That'll be up later this afternoon. Also, I will have links in there. We will be posting out the audio version. So if you subscribe to iTunes, Apple Podcasts, if you're doing Google Podcasts, Spotify, it'll be available on all the major platforms in an audio format to take with you on the go as well. And just do not forget, next week, we will continue our Midday Cafe series with Caruana Gattimo, who will be talking about adoption and governance. And then we've also published 2 new sessions, so be sure to take a look and follow aka.ms/HLS blog. With that, what are you holding up there?
I'm just taking a picture of your mug and share it
The
out
mug.
later in context.
Awesome. So we want to thank you all for joining us. And with that, have a great day. Take care. And as always, everybody, ciao.